Again, my name is Scott Robertson. I am the executive responsible for our federal cloud strategy and service delivery, both really across public sector, primarily federal and defense. I've got two intriguing guests with us that will give them a chance to introduce themselves here in a minute. But first would be Mr. Ed Mays, who is the executive director around enterprise data management and engineering for CBP. Please come join me, Ed. And then secondly, Mr. Luke McCormick, former Department of Homeland Security CIO, is going to join us in this conversation as well. So Luke, thank you. So we're going to kind of make this a little bit casual, if that's okay. If you guys just kind of grab your chairs.
Okay.
Great. So as Michael mentioned, right, there's this concept that there are other clouds in the environment that have certain capabilities that meet your needs, either investments you've already made, or as you all know, the cloud industry is constant innovation, right? It's a seesaw. One provider may be ahead of another, and then that changes, and it's constant competition and innovation. And so multi-cloud becomes very important. So what we're going to do is I'm going to frame a couple of things up front. We'll give a chance to give very brief introductions of these two great individuals. I'll frame the idea of multi-cloud for this conversation. We'll spend about 7 minutes each kind of sharing a perspective, and then hopefully have a couple of minutes at the end for questions. So I guess I'll start. From my role, I do lead cloud strategy and services for federal for IBM. I've been with IBM for about 22 years. The first half of my career has been very technology focused as a developer and architect, delivering large complex systems largely in DoD. And the second half of my career as a business leader in IBM, driving strategy and spending candidly a lot of my time with clients over the last 4 years talking about cloud, influencing modernization strategies, and ultimately focused on multi-cloud, which is a topic here today. So Ed, do you mind?
Great. I'm Ed Mays. I'm the Executive Director for Enterprise Data Management and Engineering at CBP. I also happen to be the Cloud Action Officer from the DHS perspective. That means I am driving our cloud migration for the data center and supporting the application migration for CBP as well.
Thank you. And Luke?
Luke McCormack, former CIO, Department of Homeland Security, left at the very beginning of 2017. Prior to that, I was the CIO, Department of Justice, for a couple of years, and then prior to that, the CIO at ICE, which is one of the operating components inside of the Department of Homeland Security, for about 6 years. Yeah, so sort of there at the beginning of the cloud emergence, if you will.
Well, thank you both for spending some time, and thank you to everyone for spending some time with us as well. So as I look into the future of what does it mean to get value out of cloud, and what does it really mean to enable true mission effectiveness, I think of multi-cloud. Now, if you look at the NIST definition of, say, hybrid cloud, that focuses on combining two or more distinct infrastructures, private, public, community, that still are unique infrastructures, but they're bound together by either standard or proprietary technologies that drive and enable both data and application portability, right? I want to elevate that conversation, and hopefully you'll hear from the three of us in that regard, that multi-cloud is much more than that. It talks about a concept of a real strategy of how do you create an ecosystem more than just distinct infrastructures. How do they actually work together? And so rather than shape any of the conversation here, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Mays here to kind of share his perspective first from a CBP and his experience, and then we'll go to Luke, and then I'll come back at the end. So Ed?
Thanks. From my perspective, the multi-cloud solution is where we've got to go. Even recently, my organization released an RFI asking for industry input. And what that had to do with is, what do we look like in the future? How do we leverage the different CSPs or cloud service providers that are out there? Looking at the services that are available in this larger digital ecosystem. This gives us an opportunity to actually use best of breed services, new technologies, new capabilities. Every other day there is a new service or capability that's being released across multiple cloud service support vendors. So as we are migrating, one of the things that we've got to do to ensure that we get the best of breed and deliver the best value to our customer is look at those different cloud service providers. when you look at our applications that have to be migrated, some of them are best fit in an infrastructure as a service sort of environment. Some of them are a best fit in a platform as a service environment, and others are best fit in a software as a service environment. So, for us, the challenges are rationalizing our applications, making sure that we know where they best fit, looking at the services that are available, and to ensure that we can provide that value to our customer, and to also look at what are we doing with our data, right? Data becomes one of those things that's really critical to us. We're looking at things like data lakes, right? And where does that best fit via a cloud service provider? How does that look in a cloud or in a hybrid solution? We've got a lot of challenges, but the multi-cloud solution is I think the answer for us. And it's the answer because, just like in anything in life, right? One size does not fit all. You've got to figure out what's best, where that sweet spot is, and how you can avail yourself of those opportunities.
Thank you, Ed. So, Luke?
Yeah, sure. Well, I guess I'll start with a couple things. One, I just want to say happy Memorial Day to all of you in advance, and recognizing those that have fallen for this great country and those that had not. And for everyone, thank you for your service, for the partnership, and those in the federal service that fight the good fight every day. How many of you are federal employees? I'm just curious to know that. Right? That's a good mix there. So let me just start with a little bit of a journey here. Right, we started this attack on the cloud, if you will, several years ago. And back then, you only had a couple of choices, right? And a lot of times, it was you were looking to reduce your cost and increase your reliability based on some of this aging equipment, technical debt that was in these environments, and got a pretty good boost out of that. But all of a sudden, you went from that to software as a service, primarily mail, and some of these other things that are sort of commonly known. And all of a sudden, a lot of times, based on that first choice you made, you were probably in a very crude multi-cloud environment, if you will. It wasn't by design. It was just, hey, the mail runs over here, and our infrastructure as a service is going to run over here. Then you quickly sort of went up the chain a little bit. Some of us did some containerization, and started examining some of this technology that was out there, Dockers and Kubernetes, et cetera. And that got us into more fungibility across these cloud environments, and allowed us to sort of port, if you will, or at least begin to think about porting, right, which is very important. A lot of the CIOs that I talk to, and I have the opportunity now that I'm retired to talk to a lot more of them in my spare time, so to speak. And there is a lot of discussion about choices. A lot of it is about making sure that there isn't, I don't get myself back into sort of this vendor lock-in that people think about, right? And that's very important. But as my esteemed colleague says here, it's also about the right fit. And what is happening over time is these vendors, as they continue to mature their offerings, some of the vendors that you wouldn't think of using for a cloud play, whether it's a full SaaS or a PaaS configuration, or just a straight sort of lift and shift, are now in play, right? And that gives you a lot of options. It also gives you a lot of dynamics that you got to deal with. The data and the data encryption type thing, identity management, right? How do you identify yourself in this multi-cloud environment and do that properly and keep track of that? Becomes very complex. And then now what we're starting to see, which is very promising, is a lot of tools and techniques that are acknowledging that, look, we're going to live in a multi-cloud environment. It's not just a hybrid cloud kind of configuration where I'm in my good old data center. I flop out into, cloud number one, whichever one I picked. I sort of married that cloud, and I'm in it for life. That's not that's not in play, because a lot of these tools are allowing you to move around, or the choices that you make with your SaaS choices in particularly end up in this cloud, right? I'm going to put 365, so I'm automatically going to put that in one cloud, but I'm running my, IaaS over here in this cloud. all of a sudden I've got some dynamics I have to manage. The vendor community industry, I guess, has recognized that, and there's some fantastic all software-based technologies that are out there that are allowing you to manage in that kind of an environment very cleanly, right? Everything from high performance computing to some of this basic blocking and tackling type capability. I'll lift and shift it out there, then I'll sort of move it up the stack and really turn it into a full cloud native type capability over a period of time. And these tools that are becoming available are allowing the agencies to make great choices and take advantage of some of these emerging technologies. I think one of the other things that is very important about the multi-cloud play that you're seeing in the private sector and in the public sector is taking advantage of the emerging technology that's become available in these clouds. So I don't think any agency at this point, for the most part, I'll say, I won't say any agency, but for the most part, is even considering anything but a multi-cloud environment. The issues that they're struggling with now is how do I manage it? And again, that gets easier over time as these emerging tools become available, easy to access these tools because they're all software-based that make it realistic that I can start to manage that from a broker perspective, from a cost perspective, et cetera.
Some great insights, great insights. So you guys said a couple of things that resonated with me before I kind of share a perspective. So when you talk about fit for purpose, I'm just curious, how do either of you see, maybe Ed, I'll ask you, how do you see that evolution of fit for purpose evolving from infrastructure to more application type fit for purpose?
Well, first of all, in terms of, where I'm going, where our organization is going, there's an incredible thread of organizational change, right? What do we look like 5 years from now? Well, I won't be putting servers out on the data center deck anymore, right? That'll start to diminish in a really big way. So in terms of the hardware, we already see that is being virtualized. It's going to be in the cloud for the most part. But in terms of the applications, I think there are huge opportunities here in terms of whether, as we do our rationalization to reduce the amount of applications that we have, right? Because there is some redundancy and some overlap. And that turns into O&M, right? That turns into operations and maintenance dollars that can be reused, reinfused into the overall program. Beyond that, we also see that there are some things in terms of applications that are best fit, best suited for development and living in certain environments, right? And we see that especially on things that are more workflow related, right? There are a lot of applications that we have that were organic, grew up over time in our organizations that really you could pretty much do off the shelf, right? Leveraging that could save us a lot and allow us to build out new capability. So that's one of those opportunities that's really exciting for us. Beyond that, this gives us an opportunity as well to start looking at a services brokerage, right? If you look at where we're trying to go, the services brokerage offers us an opportunity now to our customers to offer these same services. And what that means is now I can start doing some innovation in some of those platforms. Didn't have that, don't have that now. Gonna be able to have that in a very short time, hopefully. So that's another big benefit, allowing our customers to become a part of what we're doing in a platform that's easy to use and that they already understand. That's exciting for us. So there are huge opportunities in terms of application, reduction in footprint, application reduction in O&M cost, and then actually enhancing those capability sets. So that's where I see us going. And what does that mean for an organization as well? That means, and I'm sure there are many government people here, right? We're very structured, and we've been placed in organizations often that haven't changed in a long time. Well, one of the things that I'm, in my organization, I'm letting everybody know, and we've got change that's coming. And what does that mean, right? Getting the right people in the right seat with the right technology means we now get synergy in the environment, which we may have not had in the past, right? So now being able to take some of those people and focus them on a new capability that actually supports the overall mission.
Yeah, and I just want to double down, and I'll start with a real quick story and just sort of encourage the federal workforce that's out there as we get into this emerging, as a service type stuff, and you're, have built your career sort of, honing your skills in maybe a different type of environment maybe is merging into the cloud, if you will. And, 20 years ago, this happened with networks, right? We used to take networks and we'd order circuits and we'd order routers, and then we would, do the iOSs and plug them all together. And I had a whole staff that did that. And when we talked about starting to merge that to the telcos, just buy that as a service, if you will, I had a lot of folks that were really concerned about that. I used to tell them, hey, you guys come to me and your biggest complaint is, look, I'm buried. I can't get it all done. I can't get home and see my son play baseball, or my daughter's ballet lessons, or her coding lessons, or whatever it is that she's doing or he's doing. And this is a way to manage that vendor. Let them do what they can do and learn to do it very well, and then we'll go up the value chain. In this case, it was actually at CBP, trying to interface with these very sophisticated interfaces with the airlines and the broker community, et cetera, something that only they can do, right? There's only a small handful of folks that can do this in the world, right? The vendors of the world, let them do what they do best. It's the same sort of thing. You want to push this capability into the multi-cloud environments, and then work up the value chain. Some of this past stuff that's out there now, of course I can use vendors' names, so I will, the ServiceNows and the Salesforces and, those kinds of environments are really creating a plethora of capability that just absolutely didn't exist, 3 years, certainly 5 years ago. To allow you to sort of snap into that evolving technology and deliver capabilities to your customers. I can't tell you how much time I spent as a CIO saying no, or saying I wish, or I can't get to it, because I just didn't have the bandwidth and the capacity to tap into these types of capabilities. Now these capabilities are available, and you can push yourself way up the value chain and do all those things from an operational enablement, and sort of meet the promises that we have to the American citizens, if you will, to deliver on whatever those services are. Name your mission. And these multi-cloud environments and the SaaS and the PaaS capabilities that are becoming available in these things make that a very powerful proposition that allows you to deliver those types of services at a relatively economic, sort of balanced cost. I think the other thing that's interesting too is you start to look at, to get into these types of environment, the barrier of entry sort of, once you're in the environment, becomes lower, right? You sort of plowed all the plumbing to get in there, and the security, et cetera. You figured out some of your identity management. Now you're getting into some of these cloud broker capabilities and making sure that you're good in that regard, making sure your costs are under control, right? That's the first mistake that a lot of folks were making once they got in the cloud. They sort of got out there into the buffet menu, and 3 months later, they, weigh 50 pounds more than they are, i.e., the bill comes in and it's like, whoa, we've got to, well, there's a lot of technology out there now that's allowing you to sort of monitor that, meter that, scale it up and down. So some of these early implementations where they stumbled into these issues are now being addressed through these tools and techniques, picks and shovels, I like to call it, all software-based, allowing you to manage those environments in a much cleaner and more effective way.
No, great. So that, listening to that, it kind of brings me then to a perspective that I've really been formulating largely from where I see the industry going, listening to clients such as yourselves, really talking through it. One thing I would say is when I think of multi-cloud, and in this definition, infrastructure's in there twice. When I think of cloud of the future and multi-cloud, it becomes less about the infrastructure and more about the actual service delivery as we move to cloud-native applications that get developed, containers.
Serverless environments,
yeah, exactly.
Right?
They get embedded, with inside, and you're more focused about the service. So then, what I would say is, I guess what I would offer to the group here is, when you're thinking about multi-cloud, several things come to mind. One is creating a true ecosystem, right? So there's going to be a slew of services on the shelf in different provider environments that you're working with. But creating an actual catalog of services that you're able to also tailor for consumption within your community that makes sense, because some of them are just items on the shelf, like going to an auto parts store and you buy it, but until you tailor it, it doesn't really fit into your engine or your car the way you want it to, right? So part of this is being able to understand that, develop microservices and things that wrap around it, putting a business context around that service consumption. And now the phrase was mentioned about broker. Having a platform that's truly able to, A, create the catalog, B, provide the security controls and the governance in terms of what services can be consumed, making them more seamless to the user, and they're not as focused about where it is as opposed to what it is.
Sure.
Now there's a huge challenge, though. Someone mentioned, I think Ed, it was you, data. You know, we talk about you know, not having vendor lock-in and the idea of moving and portability, but I think data architecture and real thought behind some of the critical capabilities such as cognitive and analytics, right? Because once you start developing those repositories and that data grows, the idea that that's going to move around, that's going to be very expensive and not very timely to do. So really thinking through the architecture, figuring out what products, vendors really make that part of the solution whole becomes really important. And so from an IBM perspective, we are a cloud service provider. We're a research organization from an innovation perspective, but we're equally a services provider with the knowledge of your missions, right? We have industry consultants that understand the different things you're doing, CBP as an example. But also the technology understandings on what it means to implement some of these security solutions, identity management. What does it mean for me to have a single pane of glass, to integrate all these things to at least be able to provide visibility, billing, metering, some of the governance constructs. You're never going to fully reduplicate, and nor do you want to, some of the cloud native tools that each provider has. But if you don't have a framework in place, a baseline, you're still going to have shadow IT. You're still going to have other things going on where people are doing things in the cloud, and now the meter's running, and you don't really understand what's going on, right? So it's about getting that governance together. So, you know, with a few minutes left, what are your guys' thoughts about that?
Well, I'll take a stab at it. You know, I think one of the things that you're starting to see more and more of, and it's kind of an interesting dynamic, because the longer you've delayed, so to speak, the more advantage you can take of the emerging technology that has matured. Not to suggest that people should wait, because there's a lot of reasons to jump in and start swinging, right? And some of this just takes bravery, right? You know, there's you know, you just got to get into it and start to unravel some of this. But as the infrastructure and then above the line infrastructure gets more and more extracted through these different types of techniques, the serverless technologies, the Kubernetes, you know, the Dockers, you know, up the chain, you're going to get more and more focus on. Now I'm talking on organic build type stuff, purpose-built applications, which there's a lot of requirements for that in the federal government, right? There's only one TSA, right? And there's only one, you know, set of vetting capability. You know, it's not a good example, but a lot of the other things that they do that are very unique, and it's going to take a purpose-built system to build that. But as they do that, they're going to be able to take advantage of a lot of these microservices that are now readily available to them. There's going to be a lot of this infrastructure that's going to be very much extracted. They're not going to have to wrestle with that, and they'll have choices behind the scenes about which environment to run that in, because they've got containerization and some of these other things in place, and tools and techniques that are now readily available, that make that a whole lot easier than it was 3 years ago. And every year, every 6 months, that gets easier and easier to do, and they can really focus on the mission operator at that point and their needs and wants.
Okay, thank you. Ed?
Yeah, one of the key things for me is when you look at, you mentioned looking at it, you know, what we do as a business, right? And every day that's what we do inside of CBP, right? Knowing that our primary customer, and we've got to focus on the mission of that primary customer. But we also, you know, how do we remain relevant, right? How do we create competitive advantage? I mean, there are other choices, other options out there for our customers. So obviously, I'm going away from a data center model to a cloud-focused model. And that means being able to get the best-of-breed services from multiple cloud vendors is an absolute must for me. The other part of this, we're talking, infrastructure as code, changing the model from where we are now to allowing actually our app developers to control, the development of the code, the security of the code, test the code, and then instantiate the code in the cloud, right, in a Docker, if you will. One of the key things there that we talked about a little bit is, what's that security model look like? How do we build that in? What's that governance look like? The vendors are now providing across multiple clouds tools that we did not have before. One of the things that we've got to be concerned about, you mentioned cost, right? And not being aware of how dollars are being spent. So if we move to an infrastructure as code model, all of a sudden that cost and that responsibility is now at the developer level almost. So how do you prevent, as a government employee, from creating an anti-deficiency act action? So that governance becomes really important. So we're trying to look at what is infrastructure or what does code as governance look like as well. And I know that some of the services being provided across multiple platforms do that for us. And having someone provide that across multiple platforms saves me money and allows me to deliver capability to my customer much, much faster. And that's what my customer's looking for, right? Speed at lower cost. And if we can do that using best of breed across multiple CSPs, that's a win for us.
Great. So I would also offer that, as we're looking then into the future, actually establishing, thinking holistically about a true DevOps environment and having a common build, test, deploy environment where you do your development and code configuration based on the teams you have, bring them together to somewhat centrally go through that build, test, and deploy. They can be containerized and deployed to the cloud, that's appropriate, but using things like blueprints to actually do the auto provisioning and setup of the environment. These are all the things to be thinking about so that, today it's been largely about cheap infrastructure, move into the cloud. What does it mean to modernize some of my applications just to get it to run in the cloud? There's the whole next part about what does it mean to do cloud native development. What does it mean to really leverage microservices either for legacy applications or what's in the cloud, but be in a position where we've really thought it through. When I think of stakeholders, there's a contractual aspect to this, right? If I'm going to put services in the catalog, how are the SLAs and the pricing done in a holistic way? There's a pricing component that goes along with that as well in terms of discounts and based on where that's been done, who gets what, pricing. Then you get to the part that says, I'm more interested in the actual technologist perspective in terms of the service consumption I have access to and the whole security piece that we talked about. But I think also you get to the program manager and ultimately the business that says, how do those collection of things that are out there really increase my mission effectiveness as a whole? And so what I would just leave everyone with here is this is an area where, IBM, I think we definitely excel in the sense of trying to bring everything holistically together. As a services organization, believe it or not, we look for kind of the best of breed option. In many cases, it's IBM. In some cases, in other cases, it's not. In other cases, you've made investments. You mentioned some tool vendors here today. We've partnered with a number of those vendors to pull it together. I would just say that trying to go at this in piece parts is going to create a lot of complexity and cost over time.
Yeah, you're going to create your own Frankenstein, right, that you can't manage.
That's right. That's right. So being able to address it up front, it sounds like both of you through your different interactions and strategies and thought processes that are incorporating a lot of this. So, this sounds really good. And we've got about a minute left. You guys want to try to take a question or two?
Sure.
Absolutely. So any questions?
Adversaries impacting security not only of the country, but this country, but also personal assets. What is IBM and some of their other competitors dealing with this? And a follow-up question, being a federal employee, one of the frustrating things is access capability, or QuickTime, being able to pull information from land drives, being able to copy documents or files from the C drive to the land drive. It's terrible. I had a case where it took over 2 hours to transfer or to copy files over to our main drive, and it's a very big problem, also in terms of productivity. If you can answer these 2 questions, thank you.
So I'll take the first one. Maybe you guys can take the drive question if you'd like. But here's what I would say. When we talk about security and access of different people and what's out there, some of that's policy driven, right? I mean, what we're seeing is DoD has their impact level 5, 6. We're seeing more of the commercial industry, not just federal, embrace FedRAMP High and start to get some of those security controls. But then when you start talking about usage, I think that's where, and maybe Bryson talked about it, but some of the actual Watson analytics and really more understanding and proactive understanding of what type of activities are going on. Whether it's network intrusion type analysis, actual usage detection, those are more use case kinds of things that I would say that we're having a variety of conversations with clients. But if you've got a certain use case for that, I think that's a great one that really talks about a set of tools to accomplish that goal. If you guys on the drive, I can.
Yeah, I mean that I'm not going to try to diagnose your local problem there, or potentially a local problem or local challenge there. But I just in my experience, that can be a variety of things, including your desktop itself, right, and sort of that environment versus the LAN or the LAN fabric that's running in your building, et cetera. I would offer just to raise that to your network engineer, and they can trace that stuff and typically pinpoint exactly where it is. My experience is it's always been something, a lot of times, with the desktop itself, actually, oddly enough.
Well, in my case, it's actually that I'm working
Oh, okay. Well, then you've got probably a network, remote access kind of issue, and there's a variety of things that could happen there as well. But there's a lot of good tools out there to diagnose, sort of where that problem is. You just got to get the right engineer to look at it.
So I think we're at time, but the 3 of us are going to kind of hang around right outside the doors. If you guys have some other questions, love to hear from you, love to talk to you.
Absolutely.
Thank you both so much for spending time with us,
no
and
problem.
all of you as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.